For tonight's meeting, I promise to leave you confused on a much higher level and about more important things than when the meeting started. My email address is K4 Zulu Delta Hotel at ARRL.net if you have any questions that we don't get to tonight, and you can email me anytime. I'll get back with you. It may take a day or two, but I'll do it. I'd gladly do it. For background and history, generally of the Volunteer Monitor Program, the best thing to do, and I won't bore you with that tonight, but is to go to the ARRL website and search for Volunteer Monitor Program, and it'll give you some documents and things of interest. There are about 165 volunteer monitors nationwide. And as I said, I just finished January's report today to give to the new CEO, David, and let me just read that to you. For January, volunteer monitors reported 2,277 hours monitoring the HF frequencies and 2,162 hours monitoring VHF frequencies and above. As coordinator, I issued 11 advisory notices as follows. Operators in Wisconsin, Washington, Oklahoma, California, and Massachusetts received advisories concerning operation outside their license class, such as technician in general or general into the extra part. An operator in Tennessee received an advisory concerning deliberate interference, and an operator in Tennessee also received, this was another operator, an advisory regarding excessive bandwidth. Operators in Miami, let me say the operators in Florida, West Virginia, and Illinois, and New Jersey received advisories concerning identification issues. And finally, an operator in Philadelphia received an advisory regarding improper use of a linear amplifier. We had 2 meetings with the FCC, and keep in mind that we refer cases to the FCC. They also refer cases to us as well. We had no referrals from them for January, however. And I also want to mention at this point, I get some questions on WinLink and how that system is regulated. WinLink does a very good job of regulating itself. They have an automated FCC license verification and validation check of all U.S. call signs and most foreign users. And this includes checking for expired and canceled license. And I've seen numerous cases where they have blocked somebody or locked them out of the system because there was something wrong with the license or it was expired or whatever. So we've had no problems with WinLink. The volunteer monitors don't monitor WinLink. We depend on WinLink to take care of itself like that. And so far, they've done a good job. And we've seen several administrator lockouts for intentional violations or unacknowledged violations. As I said, there's about 165 volunteer monitors across the country. And we've been in operation 1 year this month. Full blown. We started off slowly last year because we didn't want to be perceived as the band cops or the band police. But I think we have avoided that image now. And so we're cranking up and we're getting a little bit more forceful with these advisories. We tried to resolve a lot of things by email this past year, and it usually worked, but there's some situations where you just have to get a little bit more formal. We have worked with the FCC regarding certain areas of the country where they need additional coverage. And so far, we've been able to provide that with volunteer monitors. The Volunteer Monitor Program actually was suggested by the FCC in 2017 as a way to enhance amateur enforcement in view of their widespread staff and budget cutbacks. There are about half the field engineers now that we had 10 years ago, and half the field offices, although all of the antenna sites are still there, and they're tied together by computer to Columbia, Maryland, to the High Frequency Direction Finding Center. But the staff, the body, so to speak, is just not what it was 10 years ago. And the FCC promised full cooperation and expedited action in cases where we get no cooperation in trying to resolve the situation. We We encourage some complainants to use their local laws as a remedy in cases of repeaters. I think Bob has some experience with that in Pennsylvania and in Texas and in Tennessee. These states have harassment by communications laws, and that has been interpreted to apply to repeaters, not just computers or telephones. And in fact, in Tennessee, one repeater took action against an individual, got a restraining order against him, and the individual violated the restraining order. And now get this, you can't make this up. The individual violated the restraining order within 1 hour of the court proceeding. So he was hauled back in and given a 30-day jail sentence, and he appealed it to the Tennessee Court of Appeals. I'm sure expecting the Court of Appeals to say, well, we can't get involved in this, it's a federal matter, the FCC has it. But the Court of Appeals of Tennessee said that was irrelevant. The fact is, the person violated a restraining order issued by the judge. That was the violation. And so they upheld the 30-day sentence. 30 days in the jail is a remarkable attitude adjustment tool for operational and local repeaters. And so far, it's worked in that case. And as I mentioned, it's important to point out that the volunteer monitors are not the band police. Our job is to audit the bands and report significant problems to the FCC if we cannot resolve them. We try to resolve them first. In most cases, in a one-on-one communication, you can get to somebody and you can get something resolved. And in some cases, that's not true, but for the most part, we can do that. The FCC expects referrals if we don't get cooperation. And as I mentioned earlier, the FCC also gives us cases to gather additional evidence on for them. Now, the biggest problem I have really is the disruptive and interfering conduct, the ugly deliberate interference on 3860 and 7200. That's our problems right now. And it's hard to get through to these people. A lot of it is not rule violation. It's just ugliness and slander and so forth. And it's hard to get through to these people that it's a black eye on amateur radio. And when I get a complaint from somebody, as I did the other night, who was trying to demonstrate amateur radio to a grandson, they happened to have the bad luck of tuning in on 3860, and they weren't happy with what they've heard. That's my biggest issue. And the new licensees, the no-code techs, never a problem. If they're a problem, it's totally accidental and easy to resolve. My biggest problem is the longer-term licensees who think they know everything because they have an extra class license and they've been on the same frequency for 10 years using 1200 watts to talk across the state. They don't like new ideas. They don't like new people. And they still bitch about the code being eliminated, but you can bet they haven't even worked a CW station in 15 years. We have thousands of frequencies, and we can't babysit the bands, and we can't babysit repeaters. We all take examinations on how to use these frequencies and how to use the equipment. And we cannot resolve what are essentially playground disputes where someone just won't be courteous enough to move 1 or 2 kilohertz away and give a net a break. And of course, a net has no specific right to a specific frequency, but you would think they could give a net a break that's been there for 40 years. And the net controls have devoted all that time to running a good net and has done so for decades. There's no reason why they can't be cut a break. And I hear lots of talk about rights on the frequencies, but I don't hear any mention of responsibilities. And when it comes to amateur radio, we don't have frequency rights. If you look at your license, you'll see that it says privileges, not rights, but privileges. And I try to emphasize to the people and talking to them before having to go to the FCC that we're all in this together, and there could be lots of other uses for our frequencies. And when you hear the idiotic conduct these days, which happens to be on 3860, and 7200, that endangers all of amateur radio. And I think personally, I'm not a scientist or a physicist, but personally I think that RF emissions do cause brain damage, but only on two frequencies, and that's 3860 and 7200. The others seem to be going pretty well. Now, the good news is that we are a cross-section of society. The bad news is we're a cross-section of today's society. And an awful lot of today's society is rude and selfish and boisterous and impolite. And we have a responsibility not to destroy our own bands with our conduct. And we have to operate as if we knew that someone was trying to demonstrate amateur radio to a young person, because our demographics just don't look good. We need more young people, and we've got to do whatever is necessary to draw them in. I've often been asked over the past 25 years, would the internet destroy amateur radio? Would email destroy it? Would Echolink destroy it? Or FT8 or remote stations? Would WhatsApp or texting just destroy amateur radio and make it obsolete? And I've come to the conclusion, after a lot of enforcement, years of enforcement and talking to a lot of operators on both sides of our spectrum, I've come to the conclusion that the biggest threat to amateur radio is the microphone. We met the enemy, and the enemy is us, as the cartoon says. Some of these frequencies, if you listen to them, are just a disgrace. It's, as I said, ugly, deliberate interference situations. Now, I may be focusing a little too much on the negative, but then that's my job, because my job is to keep the negative down to an absolute minimum, if I can. I think it was Edward R. Murrow that said, just because your opinion can now be heard around the world doesn't mean it's any more important than when it could only be heard down at the end of the bar. But you put some of these people behind a microphone, you give them that anonymity, and their whole conduct changes. My philosophy is that we have a responsibility to pass on this joyful avocation to future licensees in at least as good a shape as we found it. All of us had met with some type of inspiration to get us into amateur radio. And some of these really bad operators that aren't necessarily breaking any specific rules, I try to tell them, think about that inspiration and think about when you first got licensed, if you ever perceived or ever thought that you might be operating as you are today. Now, on some of these conduct situations, it's not just the actions, but it's the conduct itself that sets a very bad example for amateur radio. And I'll make the point for this reason. We have a lot of clout with the power industry now. In fact, I've been on a committee with IEEE for the last 3 years, which is finishing up developing a standard for power line companies to use in resolving radio interference cases from their power lines and power line hardware. And that's a big committee, and there's lots of power companies on it, and they've been splendid to work with, and they've come up with a beautiful standard that even the smallest power company can read and understand how to approach radio interference problems from power line hardware. But we don't, the new thing on the block these days, of course, is the solar industry. But we don't have the same clout with the solar industry because it's too new. When you see these vast fields, and I'm talking about the really big fields of solar panels, there's a device in those solar panels called an optimizer. And these are the panels that are so big that a cloud cover can come over one part of it and not another part. That's how big they are. But when that happens, the optimizer ramps up the cells that are getting the sun to make up for the lack of sun, the other cells. Now, the thing is, it causes horrible interference to the amateur radio service. It's just debilitating. And it's not particularly clear in Part 15 who's responsible for that. And Part 15 of the Act, of the Communications Act, is very complicated. In fact, I only met one person in my life who claimed to fully understand it, and he was a wacko himself. So I knew he didn't fully understand it, because nobody does. But it's not clear there what action to be taken. Now, if we get into a dispute or a tug of war with the solar power industry, I don't want the solar power industry to come into a congressional subcommittee and say, you want to protect amateur radio? Well, this is what we hear on 75 meters at night or 7,200 in the afternoon. Why would you want to protect this? If that happens, we're dead in the water, and we'll be cut loose. And so I try to tell these people to think about things like that. The league says that in a few years, solar power interference will far outnumber power line interference. And so we have to have our best foot forward and be in the best shape we possibly can to have the most credibility to stand up and attack this interference. We have to take the high road, and we have to be grateful for our frequencies and use them with that attitude. And I think if everybody would operate with the attitude that, well, there's somebody may be listening to me trying to recruit a new person into amateur radio. That's all you need to do, because the conduct that worries me the most is not the flat rule violations. That's pretty easy to attack, and there's sanctions. But a lot of these groups late at night, what they're doing is not technically a rule violation, except to the extent that maybe they don't identify, things like that. But it's the way they sound and act that, in 1997, that was the end of a 12-year period of neglect in the amateur radio service by the FCC. We started the new enforcement program in 98 and 99, and the bands were really in bad shape because nothing had been done for 12 years. The commission did not have the resources because of the explosive growth in the land mobile industry. They just didn't have the resources to put into amateur radio. And when we started it again, an enforcement program again in 98 and 99, there was a lot to be done. The bands were really in bad shape, and we cannot go back to that period. We just can't let ourselves go back to that period, because these days, and this is going to get worse as the federal deficit gets bigger, but these days, the FCC doesn't have the resources that it had then to bring compliance back into the amateur radio service. So now, more than ever before, we have to be self-policing, and all of us must appreciate what we have. And a lot of the violations that I mention or talk to people about are absolutely accidental. 80% of all interference cases, and this is true when I was at the FCC as well, 80% of all interference cases are totally accidental. And I have heard people on 75 meters arguing about who was playing music. And I knew at the time, based on conversations with a high frequency direction finding center, that it was an errant shortwave station somewhere in the world. So we can't assume that we're being interfered with just because we hear something that doesn't sound right. We have to have a positive attitude and appreciate what we have. And it doesn't hurt to change frequencies. You know, I've got an Allied radio catalog downstairs from the 40s, or I guess 50s. And I noticed that every piece of equipment made since then, even up through the flex type radios now, has one big knob, and that's the knob that changes frequencies. So often the best solution to a problem is just to change frequencies and go somewhere else instead of taking the bait and getting into an argument over perceived deliberate interference when it's actually accidental. If we could operate with the underlying principle being a gratitude for the thousands of frequencies that we have and all the modes and activities that we can engage in. We're not even channelized except on one band, 60 meters. We're extremely fortunate. But if we use it with appreciation and gratitude, then that lessens the chance that we'll lose it. So a lot of that is actually enforcement. Enforcement is as much psychological as it is looking for specific rule violations. It's the overall attitude and operators taking things for granted that bothers me at least as much, and usually much more than any specific rule violations that can be approached and corrected. So that's my philosophy on the thing, and we're cranking up. As I said, we tried to be very polite with email, handling a lot of problems by email for the last year, but now I think that it's time to crank up because we've shown that we are not the band police. We're trying to keep a minimum or a certain level of compliance in the amateur service. And so you'll see more and more actions. And I know that at the rate we're going now, this being February 10th, you'll see at least 8 or 10 advisory notices or warnings for February. But 4 of the people who got these advisory notices in January have already responded, totally apologetic or explaining what happened. And I don't think we'll ever have a problem with them again. So if you show up and ask what's going on, that solves a lot of problems. And so you have to address this, or it gets worse and worse. And all of you know about the broken window theory of enforcement. If you let the little things go, it just gets worse and worse. But overall, I'm very, very happy with the volunteer monitors. We've had I think we've had 1 resignation. We've had a few that were seriously ill from COVID, and 1 passed away. Otherwise, there's been no turnover. And the hours that they are reporting are just incredible. And I try to tell the amateur operators that all these hours of reporting are hours they could have been enjoying amateur radio. But because they love amateur radio, they're listening to the bands and listening to the frequencies and trying to help make amateur radio into a better situation. As I said, if you have any questions, send me an email. I'll be glad to answer it, and I'll take some tonight. I don't know how much time you have, but I can take questions tonight if you have time.
We got plenty of time, and if you guys know how to raise your hand if you want to speak. Otherwise, put your question into the chat box. Okay, Marty, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Good evening. Hello, Riley. Thank you for being with us tonight. I'm wondering whether most of the incidents in which you issue an advisory are the result of somebody, a non-participant in the process, sending an inquiry or a notice to you, and how much are your volunteer monitors just coming across something?
99% so far have been the volunteer monitors detecting it. Anybody can complain. We prefer that they complain through the volunteer monitor system. And by that, I mean send the complaint to me and I can assign it to a volunteer monitor. But if the complaint comes in just from individual and it seems credible and we can verify it, then we don't require a volunteer monitor involvement in that necessarily. But of the 12 things that were issued in January, all but 1 came from something that a volunteer monitor detected.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Marty.
Anybody else out there? Okay, Barry, you want to take the...
Chad wants to know, can you explain the process involved in monitoring the bands?
Well, the volunteer monitors can listen to any frequency or all frequencies. We just ask them to divide up their time in their report, let us know how many hours were put into HF and VHF, so that we can sort of correlate the number of hours with the number of problems. So we don't tell them, we give assignments to volunteer monitors. For example, tonight, I asked a volunteer monitor to specifically listen to some frequencies down on 75 meters. But usually the reports come in from something that a volunteer monitor just detected on their own, just doing general monitoring of the frequencies. It's an audit, and they know their instructions are to listen to the bands, tell us the degree of compliance. And when they file their hourly report or monthly report, they will indicate in there if they ran into any things of note, even though they didn't file any requests for advisories, we like for them just to state what impression they had of the bands that they were monitoring during that month.
Okay. So Bill wants to know, what approach do you take to deal with the issues on 3860 and 7200? And are there any actions we should take when we hear this stuff?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I wish more people would ask the second part of that question. The FCC doesn't want to take, although I think they're going to have to before long, doesn't want to take language cases because they have been burned a few times in court from language cases. What happens on 3860 and 7200, and we're watching these all the time, is usually when you have the horrible juvenile conduct. You have juvenile delinquents essentially there operating with thousands of dollars worth of equipment, and they took tests for the license, and they're acting like that. We look for any violation in there, whether it's failure to identify or deliberate interference, anything like that. And usually we find that we can't say you need to act more human, or you need to act like an amateur radio operator, or you need to listen to the code of conduct or read the code of conduct. That's kind of an educational thing. And I'll talk to them on the phone. I'll talk to them by email. What you can do not to further that is just avoid frequencies like that and not be drawn into it. And if you hear something that you don't like, just go to another frequency. A lot of people will try to engage them, and I appreciate that, and I know what they're trying to do, but so many of these people just want attention of any kind. And somebody doing deliberate interference just wants to hear comments about it. And the thing they can't stand the most is to be ignored, and usually they'll go away. Interference to a net, for example, usually will go away pretty quickly if it's just ignored. But the main thing that you can do is, and you may lose some friends over this. Excuse me. You may lose some friends over this. I have. There have been a couple of nets on 75 meters that I've enjoyed checking into over the years, but I stopped because they got a little bit too raw and a little bit too crazy, and they were not a good example for amateur radio. So I just didn't participate anymore. And you may have to tell some people, listen, I'm out of this. I'm signing out of this. I'm not listening to this. Here's my 73. I'm gone. Just don't be part of the problem. And sometimes being part of the solution is just to go away, leave them alone, go somewhere else.
Okay, good. Another interesting question. What type of training do the VMs require to become a VM?
Well, we had the training program after we made the selections. And I want to say a word about the selection process first. We didn't turn anybody down, actually. We opened the application filing window, and we got about 200 applications, and we started going through them chronologically. And everybody got accepted, except maybe for one or two who really didn't have an adequate station to do monitoring. Until we got to about 165 or 170, and we realized that was a manageable number. The rest are in a reserve pool. But we have a training manual for them. We had several seminars, webinars, and the FCC participated in the training. We'll have training again in March to keep them up to date. And we had them do some informal monitoring January of last year and part of February, and send in what they thought were cases that required attention. And then in our webinar, we deal with those and say, well, this is a good case. This is something we could work on. Or this case is not something we would get involved in. It's kind of an on-the-job training. We did that through January. And then February, we started the rollout. Now, some people are anxious to find every little violation, but I don't really see that problem. I mean, if somebody doesn't identify after until 15 minutes instead of 10, we don't get involved. That's not going to tear the fabric of amateur radio society apart. If somebody is out of band say they call CQ, their general, and they call CQ in the extra portion. I get a lot of those. I got 60 of those last year, but not one of the 60 did I get a repeat report on. And so when you get a report that somebody called CQ in the extra portion for 1 minute and then you didn't hear them anymore, that tells me that they probably realized their mistake. And we've all had those oh hell moments. I mean, there's not a person in this group tonight that hasn't called CQ on a dummy load and wondered why they didn't get an answer, or turned on the rig and wondered what was wrong with the audio and realized the headphones were plugged in from the night before, or tried to check into a 80-meter net on the 20-meter beam as I did the other night. All of us make mistakes. Those are innocent mistakes. But now where we have 2 or 3 examples from the same licensee who work stations, work DX in the wrong portion of the band, that's not an accident. That's what we're training these people to look for, and that's what we deal with. So overall, I think the volunteer monitors have a very realistic approach. Innocent mistakes are not going to degrade the bands, and that's when I say it's not the new people really causing the problem. It's the deliberate interference that relates to conduct. Somebody, as in one case I have, where there were 30 contacts out of band. Now that's a serious thing. That's not just an innocent mistake.
Okay. Are there any changes expected in the program and the MOU with a new administration and a new leadership at the FCC?
No, we're going right along. The agreement was vetted by the chairman, Chairman Pye, and he's had been there for years and years under a couple of administrations. The bureau chiefs looked at it, and we're just rolling right along. I don't expect any change whatsoever along those. They seem to be very grateful for the program, and they have called on us for help, and fortunately we've been able to respond and help them. We found a couple of situations that I think even they were surprised that we were able to find. So I enjoy working with them. They seem to be very, very appreciative of the program, and I don't expect any changes. If anything, I think they will rely on us more, because with the COVID relief plans, you know, our deficit is of course in the stratosphere anyway, and it's just going to get worse. So I don't see them being able to make up for the loss of staff anytime soon. So I think if anything, they will call on us more, and they have called on us a couple of times for non-amateur cases, and we were able to help them.
Okay, so what equipment is required?
I'm sorry, you broke up.
Volunteer monitor, and how will the events? Okay, what equipment is required to be a volunteer monitor, and how are the events reported by the volunteer monitors to you?
Okay, the equipment is just good basic equipment and a good basic antenna. It doesn't have to be SDR. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. We have people with one transceiver and a dipole antenna, and we have people with a whole room full of equipment. Just the ability to listen to the bands. And we do require that you be able to electronically record something if you need to, and send it to us, send it to me in a file. And I saw a question pop up: how do they report the violations? The volunteer monitors send the violation to me. And if I see some complaints that aren't through the volunteer monitor program, but it's something that I can handle, then I just assign it to myself and do it. But the volunteer monitors report their findings to me in an incident report, and they file that, and we determine what to do about that.
Okay. Are there certain time requirements per month to be a VMO?
No requirements. I was concerned about that at first, but we didn't want to make it a burden. And you know, the reason that we were able to do this program is because of the success of the Official Observer program, which was, 40 or so years. And the FCC had a great appreciation for that. They did not act on a lot of the Official Observer cases, but for various reasons. And when we started enforcement again, full-blown in 1999, the first 25 or 30 cases we had were from the OO program. But we haven't found it necessary to monitor a certain number of hours. In fact, I have questioned some volunteer monitors who turned in a huge number of hours, and I said, look, you're monitoring too much. You've got to enjoy amateur radio. This is not your sole job, and we want you to enjoy it too, because you are a volunteer monitor. We have some that report huge numbers because they just have the radios on all the time. For example, UHF, BHF, they have scanners on. And especially with COVID, we've been able to get a lot of monitoring in because people are at home so much. And I just saw question 2 flash up about, is there a form? They have a template that they send to me about the date of the violation, the time, frequency, what they heard, the call sign, and so forth. And I look at that, and in some cases, I'll go back for additional information. Other cases, I'll say, especially if they have recording, I'll say, this is good enough for a notice now, but this is just informal. I'm going to send an email, and we'll see if we can work it out. In 90% of the cases, we can. And the more serious ones, like we got in January, requires a written advisory. And in some cases, I'll ask for some more hours of monitoring on that frequency to beef up what they found. We're not automated to the extent that we just can enter I have to enter the hours manually after the volunteer monitors report into me. And I have to enter the incident reports manually into our tracking system. But that's going to change here soon. We're a little bit delayed on the automation of it because of COVID. But we're getting there, and it's working pretty well. It's a lot of data entry work on my part right now, but on the other hand, that gives me a feel for exactly what they're doing.
Dan, do you want to handle the hand that's up?
I'm sorry?
I'm talking to Dan.
Oh, okay.
We can keep
Sorry, I
going.
was muted. Yeah, Susan, go ahead and take it. Susan? WA0B, yeah, WA0B, wow. Susan, okay, let's move over.
Sorry, that was an error.
Okay.
That's a good call sign.
Yes. Okay, well, let's keep going, and then we'll go to Robert in just a minute. Dan from California wants to know if the ARRL or FCC has put any effort into identifying the individuals who the press said used ham radio on January 6th, which resulted in a statement from the ARRL that aggravated a lot of volunteers.
Well, the FCC asked us to be vigilant on the bans during that period and look for conduct that you would, on any given day, feel compelled to report to the authorities anyhow. And so we just wanted to remind everybody, be especially vigilant in the next few weeks. If you hear something, say something that this sounds credible. And we got a couple of reports, but nothing big. There's some Patriot nets operating on 75 meters. They're just fine. You can talk about anything you want to. They just wanted us to be vigilant about something that would be unlawful, the type of thing that if you heard on any day not related to an inauguration or anything that you'd be concerned about, go to raise an eyebrow. That's all we did. And we had a couple of reports, but that was about it. And I was really glad to see that some days I think God is a ham operator, and I think inauguration, the riot at the Capitol must have been one of those days, because thank God I saw no hats with call signs on them. And I was greatly relieved not to see any call signs. There could have been ham operators there. That's their business, but I just did not want to see, hey, what's that K3 such and such mean on that guy's hat, you know?
How is a non-licensed amateur face handle?
How's it what?
A non-licensed amateur face handle, someone that doesn't have a license.
Usually somebody that doesn't have a license shows up on a repeater. because of the Baofangs, the very inexpensive radios. And the repeater group is automatically gets on the alert, and they discourage that person, or they'll run it down to a neighborhood, and we will warn them that a license is required. I'm surprised that we don't have a lot more of it on the repeaters, given the huge number of repeaters in the country. But we don't have much at all. That's going to increase as the equipment is even cheaper, and you can get a Baofang off of Amazon, and somebody ordering it doesn't know what it is. But if they don't talk to them, they go away usually. And if they tell them you can't be on this repeater without a license, it usually goes away. I don't have any case of a repeated unlicensed person on a repeater. Well, maybe one in the country where the interference is deliberate, but usually the repeater group knows what's going on in their area, and we'll find out eventually. On the HF bands, you have some unlicensed, but usually, you know, everybody's very good about wanting to hear IDs, call signs. And they just, if they don't have a license, they don't really have anybody to talk to. So that sort of takes care of itself.
Okay. Dan, you want to handle the hands now?
Yeah, Robert, you want to take it?
See if I can get off mute. Can you hear me? Dan?
Yeah, hear you fine. Go ahead.
Thank you, Riley, for stepping in, and I sure am glad you're Riley Hollingsworth to get this program, because with the experience with the commission and your overall life experience, which makes me think who's going to be your successor, but we got decades to go there, I'm sure.
I'm going to do this as long as I know what ARRL, if I can still determine what ARRL stands for, I'll keep doing it.
Well, I'm thinking that's a fine and wonderful thing. I don't plan on checking out any time soon myself. So you mentioned a repeater group, and yes, in our part of the world, we do have one or two trolls that are pernicious. When a group outside of the repeater group wants to do fox hunting or whatever for a troll, if you will, is the repeater group invited in, or are they going to do it themselves? How is that handled?
You mean what did you repeat that? A group outside the repeater group?
In other words, we have an Aries net that's, that's consistently interfered with. Go ahead.
Okay, anybody can do the fox hunt. It's just that we can't, the repeater group or somebody that the repeater group is working with has to handle it in the first instance, because we have so many repeaters that we just don't have enough volunteer monitors.
Understood, but how is the repeater group brought into the event? It's been discovered.
Oh, okay. First of all, when I get a complaint about a problem on a repeater or an unlicensed situation from a volunteer monitor, we report that to the repeater licensee. And in some cases, they'll say, yeah, we know about that, and we had that last year and we ignored it and it went away. Or we know who it is, we think, and we're going to be dealing with them. Or we have no idea who it is and we need help. And that's when we talk to them about getting together a group to try to run it down. But the repeater licensee has the first responsibility there, because a repeater is just like leaving the doors open to your house, to your base station on HF. You're responsible for what happens on the repeater. And in some cases, you may have to shut it down. Now, we don't like that remedy, because that would enable people to act so badly on a repeater they could get it shut down. But we go to the licensee and say, look, this is what we're hearing, and you need to do something about that, and we'll help you if we can. And of course, usually they're very, very cooperative. We have a few repeaters in California. The W6 NUT repeater is one that's historically insane. That was our first big case, and I remember what the owner of the repeater told me in 1999. He said, my repeater is horrible. I have a bunch of crazy people on here. Most of them are a few French fries short of a Happy Meal. But if you clamp down on my repeater, they're going to go to other repeaters in California, and it's just going to triple and quadruple the problem. And we clamped down on the repeater anyway, and they did go to other repeaters. But part of that is just the nature of California. It's always going to be different. But all across the country, 99% of repeaters work just perfectly on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, let's take one more from the hands up, and then we'll go back to the text questions there. Dale, you want to go ahead and take it?
Yeah, just one quick one. How many operators are involved on those 2 HF frequencies that are causing problems?
I would say about 10, and it's the same, basically the same group that goes to 3860 late at night, 7200 in the late afternoon. Seems to be the same people. Some of them don't identify, but it's not that hard to do voice identification. So we basically know who 99% of them are, except for not identifying. A lot of it is not rule violation. It's just being incredibly stupid and give an amateur radio a black eye, and something you would never want somebody who wasn't an amateur radio operator to hear and say, hey, what's this I hear on 75 meters late at night? What's that about? It's just an embarrassment.
Okay, Barry, want to go back to the text?
Okay. Is the equipment that the monitors use need to be certified by NIST?
No, they just use standard amateur equipment. Now, if they want to get some better equipment, they can. But all we require is a good, healthy amateur setup, because they're listening. And when it comes to direction finding, we are working on a program with Flex and some other companies generally on time difference of arrival. And we're experimenting with that. And with time difference of arrival, if you have a network of receivers out there, SDR receivers, you can get within, it depends on the propagation and the time of day, but the times we have tried it, we got within a certain county. And if you can locate that problem to a county, amateur radio operators in that area, they're going to know who it is, or it's going to be easy for them to find out. Flex Radio got a big contract with the government, but they had told us a couple of years ago that after this contract, they would license the TDOA system to the league for free. And I think the contract's taken a little more time than they thought, but we're really anxious to work with them, and I hope to bring something along those lines this year with Flex. We tried it with Kiwi SDR and other SDR receiver networks, and it's very helpful. And I think if we refine it and get really good at it, it can be a good adjunct to direction finding by the commission, because we don't have to get to a street. Amateurs usually know what's going on in their area. And if we have a problem, like I say, and we know that it's in Adams County, Pennsylvania, for example, the amateurs in and around Adams County, they'd be able to find that pretty soon.
Okay. Is there a specific license class you need to be a monitor?
No, we have some technicians that are doing it.
Okay. Oscar said, does education lead to the best enforcement?
Yes, usually so. My first approach is to try one-on-one with somebody, and for example, in a couple of the cases where somebody was out of the general class band into the extra, there had been something circulated around that they showed us that they had seen on the internet saying that they could use those frequencies. It wasn't true, but you know how the internet is, and they thought it was true. So I just saw something flash up that hydroelectric plants are using that to monitor their systems. Are you talking about time difference of arrival?
That I'm not sure.
What's that?
I don't know.
Okay.
Asking on the question.
90% of the enforcement issues can be resolved with a letter or one-on-one phone call. It's that 10% that we need to keep down to that level, and that requires action by the FCC. For example, we have a situation where a license came up for renewal, and it's one of our problem players on 7200 and 3860, and that license is not being renewed until the FCC can find out what's going on with all these volunteer monitor complaints. So that license is held up. We are probably going to ask the FCC in a couple of cases to initiate a proceeding to remove voice privileges from some licenses so that they can only use CW or digital. And we never seem to have any enforcement problems in CW, but some of these people just have no business having a microphone. There are all kinds of remedies. Local courts, even as I said at the beginning of this at this meeting, and I think Bob up in Philadelphia there has had numerous repeater problems up there, and has been able to solve them with that type of action or threats of that type of action. So we just use every tool we can. There's no one way to do it.
Okay. Are there volunteer monitors in each state?
In every state, we don't. I think it's Montana, maybe, or it's either Montana or Wyoming that we don't have the volunteer monitoring.
And Sterling says, indeed, quite a few internet communities have been pondering the use of ham radio to bypass censorship, avoid tracking, etc. As silly as that sounds, it's a matter of time before someone tries. So, yeah, it's probably true.
I didn't hear all of that. You're right.
A few internet communities have been pondering the use of ham radio to bypass censorship, avoid tracking, etc. As silly as that sounds, it's just a matter of time before someone tries.
Yeah, that's probably true. That's probably true.
Okay. Do you have any information on broadband over power lines?
Well, that hasn't been an issue here. The league did a wonderful job of attacking that. There was a period there, I was still at the FCC at the time, where I thought that was the biggest threat to amateur radio since the shutdown in World War II. The league, the FCC did not do a good job on those studies. They redacted some of the studies that showed that BPL was harmful. The league did research and found otherwise and took the FCC to court. And the FCC lost big time in the Court of Appeals for having cherry-picked the scientific studies. Those are the words of the ruling in that case. And a lot of us in the FCC privately cheered that decision. And so since then, BPL hasn't been a threat, and I've heard no interference from BPL. Technology overcame BPL too, that helped. But there for a while, that was the most dangerous thing. And I would talk to some of these people who were acting up on the bands late at night, and I would say, look, we're in a battle over this BPL, and you're going to embarrass us. And a couple of them said, what is this BPL thing? And I'm thinking, the biggest issue in amateur radio since World War II, and you don't even know what it is. But BPL came and went, and it was never a good idea, but it was very debilitating to amateur radio. But the way the commission handled that, it shot itself in the foot. And then technology overcame that. So I don't hear any issues of it anymore. Maybe some of you do, but I haven't heard that BPL issue in years. And I see here from W6RT, California weirdos appreciate the program too. California is different. It's always going to be different. It was different in land mobile. When I was doing land mobile interference resolution, I think most of the rules were written because of California, but it's just different. And we have some problems, serious problems with the WARFA out in California. And we're trying to attack that too. That's very embarrassing. And once again, that's a late night 75-meter problem.
Is there a process for intruder watch that was part of the old OO program? For example, intermods from broadcast stations or ships using amateur frequency?
I think the volunteer monitors do that. We have occasionally asked them to monitor on non-amateur frequencies if they had the resources to do it. Most of them do now with the equipment that we have that's, DC to daylight. But they report that, and we did have a volunteer monitor report a shortwave station whose license had expired 10 years ago. So they're out there listening, and we can certainly ask them in a specific case to give it a listen. But we've had a number of cases come in that were it was some type of interference or activity that wasn't amateur related, although it was on or near the amateur bands. And the FCC on occasion has said, "Hey, can your folks listen to this frequency?" And that was the case up in I think it was Ohio, where they found another shortwave station, and there were some other things going on with that shortwave station too, which are confidential. We're not privy to that, but I know that whatever they found was very valuable stuff.
Okay. Here's an interesting question. Is the FCC leaving the more raucous talk groups on DMR to Brandmeister to deal with?
For who to deal with?
Brandmeister, which is the company that runs the DMR repeaters, or one of the big companies that, other than Motorola, that puts out DMR repeaters.
Now you're talking, did you say GMR, like General Mobile?
DMR.
DMR.
Digital mobile radio. It's a digital FM basically service.
I don't know. This is different from DMR repeaters.
That's what it's DMR, amateur DMR.
Okay. No, I've gotten a couple of complaints on DMR systems, but I think they can lock out people if they want. I don't know exactly how DMR works. I don't have any experience with it, but I have one complaint right now on a DMR repeater, but that's all.
Okay. And someone, Tom Brown, N4NAB, November 4, November Alpha Bravo. The North Carolina FCC has information on broadband over power lines, if anyone is looking for information.
Okay, all right.
Let's see. What is the involvement of the ARRL in interference issues with unintentional radiators, like battery chargers, etc.?
Well, the lab at the league handles those cases, and we have an informal agreement with the league, which is now, I guess, close to 20 years old, that when it comes to radio frequency interference, the league tries to handle it first. If somebody reports something that they hear, the league will talk to them on the phone, listen to it, get a recording of it, and try to determine what it is. You have to determine what it is before you can determine where it is. And they have a 90% success rate with that, actually. And I've seen them, or I've heard them listen to it on the telephone and say, well, that is an electric fence charger or a golf cart charger. It's amazing what they can find out just from listening to the signal. So they get those cases first. And for example, suppose it's coming from a neighbor's, well, even aquarium heater, but a neighbor's golf cart charger or something. The league will send a letter to the neighbor, to that person, and explain what their role is and what it's causing and so forth. So they solve 90% of these. The lab is, I don't know how they do it with just a couple of people up there, 3 or 4 people. I'm not sure how many they have, but in that agreement, and it is in the handbook. I think it was the 2017 Big Amateur Handbook, Amateur Radio Handbook. It explains that, and it may have been in subsequent issues, but explains the long-standing agreement that the FCC's had with the league to approach those first. And they really do a splendid job of running that down. And a lot of cases, somebody assumes right off the bat that it's radio frequency interference from a power line, and it turns out to be something in their own house, such as an aquarium heater or a modem that's gone haywire or something across the street. The big thing now, of course, is the marijuana grow lights. The first batch of grow lights caused horrible interference, and it's changing now, but in years past, you couldn't just walk up and knock on a door and have somebody admit to having a grow light for their marijuana plants. Although it's, more and more accepted and more legal, but those things were horrible at first, and the league worked with the individual manufacturers for those lights, and has made a lot of progress in that. Same way with these arc fault devices that you put on in your breaker box. those things were causing interference and tripping out when an amateur radio signal was near them. The league worked with the manufacturer very successfully of one of the largest brand of those systems, and they changed the design of it. And Tesla, another example, the league works with Tesla on interference from solar power systems. And Tesla has been absolutely splendid in working with the league, and they have agreed to send out a technician in every single case where that's reported, and they've done so far and solved it. And that goes back around to where if we have credibility, and if we keep ourselves a viable part of the communications infrastructure, then those companies will have more respect for us and will work with us more to solve these problems. Because every day there's more RF stuff on the market, and every day there's a little bit more RF junk on the market. And the stuff's getting smaller and cheaper, and that's probably not going to change in our lifetime.
Okay, I think we're just about done with questions in the chat, Dan, and I don't see any hands.
Okay, well, like I say, shoot me an email. I'll answer your question. Give me a couple of days, and if I don't know the answer, I'll run it down for you. And thanks a lot for inviting me.
One more. Someone was noticing issues with remote reading utility meter telemetry interference.
I have heard of that. The league would know more about that. They're up on the latest problems and technology with that. I haven't gotten a case of that myself. I've just heard of it.
Okay.
And usually the league can work with the power company, say this is what's happening. If you will merely make this change or go to this brand or whatever, it'll solve it.
Okay, well, Dan, back to you. You're muted, Dan.
Gotta watch what I'm doing here. Thank you, Barry. I sent out after each of these a link, an email, a follow-up email. It's got a link to the video, tonight's presentation, a copy of the chat and all the questions, the compliments and such that was for the night, and we'll get that taken care of. Hopefully get that out by tomorrow sometime. One more time, is there any more comments or questions out there?
Thank you, Riley. Thank you. And if you want to do this periodically to stay updated, I'll be glad to do it.
Okay.
Might be something to do regularly, and like I say, I'll file a monthly report with the league, and there's no better tool than to get out and talk to groups like this, and get the word out and get ideas of better ways to improve our VM system and so forth. So I'll be glad to do this anytime you want.
Okay, I'll get with you on a reasonable scheduling program for you, and we'll do that. I might add that the emails of follow-ups goes out to several thousand hands worldwide. So these get a lot of watching from all over the place. So if you get some strange looking call signs trying to email you, you know where it came from.
Okay, very good. And we'll do this anytime you want. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for coming. Appreciate it very much. Okay, anybody else before we pull the plug here? I see nothing. I'm going to say 73s, everyone. Thanks again, Riley. I really appreciate it. Been a great presentation.
Thank you, Dan. We'll talk again.
For coming.
Thank you.
And again, you can log back in after I close it out if you just want to chat, just like a club meeting. Just come back in and log back in and chat with everybody. Bye now, 73s.